Welcome to LifeShot podcast. Guys, I want to thank you so much for watching this video. There's so many other videos out there, but you're listening to the LifeShot, and I want to thank you for doing so. I interviewed Dr. Alex Archibald from the Cambridge University for LifeShot. We spoke about air pollution, whether our air is becoming more toxic as life goes on, and whether, this planet's still going to be in a few hundreds of thousands of years, and whether life could be sustained. And we spoke about other planets, volcanoes, bicycles, houses with air filtration, so many different things. So have a listen into this interview. I think you're going to find it interesting. And just want to apologize that when I took the video, I was like in a rush and I cut myself off from the video. So, I'm just trying to be real here. I'm just going to put the video out anyway. So just apologies as you watch this, but I'm sure that you're still going to enjoy the interview. Thanks so much. Here we go. LifeShot, Dr. Alex Archibald from the Cambridge University talking about air pollution.
Hey yo, it's the LifeShot podcast. Change your world and change the world.
Dr. Alex Archibald, welcome to LifeShot.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Very good. So it's interesting. I met you on a train.
Yeah.
I was looking over your shoulder and I saw Chemical Kinetics.
Yeah.
I thought, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
I thought, I wonder if it's relevant for everyday people who are just doing stuff. So I thought, could you give us just a brief explanation of what chemical kinetics is before we start, and then just so we can lay the foundation for that?
Yeah, sure. So let's break it down into the two words, chemical. So we're made up of chemicals. Chemicals are all around us.
Yeah.
Chemicals often get a bad connotation associated with them. People want a chemical-free life. Well, that's baloney. We're made of chemicals.
Yeah.
If we have a chemical-free life, we're dead. There's nothing. So the whole world is made up of different chemicals. And kinetics kind of, comes from the Greek for action. And so what we're talking about with chemical kinetics is molecules in action. So for life, we require things like enzymes. Enzymes speed up reactions that are happening in our body. You might have had some alcohol at one point in your life.
And so that's a reaction happening in your body.
So there's an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, which converts the alcohol into something less toxic. And so if you don't have this alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme, then you'll have the world's longest and worst hangover. So
it's a good thing we got those.
And kinetics is just the study of reactions, effectively.
So I've read it's the rate of the reaction that happens.
That's right, yeah. So there are some reactions which happen super fast. So if you've ever used a laser pointer, like that, what's happening is a chemical reaction, and the chemical reaction gives off light, and that's what you see. And then the speed at which that reaction happens is like 10 to the minus 15, which is 0.15 zeros and a 1. So tiny, super fast, effectively. A super fast reaction. But then, if you've ever been to a cave, you've seen some stalactites and stalagmites, these things which grow down from the ceiling and up from the floor. And they take, those are chemical reactions which are forming those. And those reactions occur over thousands, if not millions of years. And so kinetics really is this study of reaction rates that vary from the super fast to the super slow. But they're all important.
So does it reach into different areas of our lives, like technology, medicine, psychology?
I guess in terms of psychology, it kind of comes again down to biological reactions. In technology, there's a huge amount to do with batteries at the moment. We're constantly using batteries. We want them to charge fast and sustain themselves for a long time. That's a kinetic process. So people work in the department that I work at here in Cambridge University in the chemistry department of how to make better batteries. So batteries that give out more energy and charge quicker. That's a kinetic process. And I guess in terms of our mood, that there are a bunch of different hormones, again, which are kind of being processed through reactions, which are all natural. And for some people, there might be things like deficiencies in certain enzymes or proteins, and it's sort of the proteins which make us up.
So you do think that there would be some biohackers who are interested in chemical kinetics? Because you want to improve the way your body works.
Yeah,
right?
possibly there might be. Certainly people have come up with sort of ideas of how you could apply aspects of chemical kinetics for the military or things like that.
So to improve human endurance or
the opposite
strength.
to remove people. And so it's funny things, like it could even be things that you could consume that have different types of chemicals in them that react much slower, and so then you can't break them down, and so as a result you don't get the energy from those. And so things like heavy water. Heavy water, it's basically chemically similar to water, but the molecule itself is heavier. There's extra neutrons.
What does that do to your body then?
Well, your body then struggles to break the bonds in the water. So we need to water's a great molecule in our bodies for providing sources of other molecules. And in doing that, we have to break the bonds in water apart. And in heavy water, the bonds are very strong.
So your body just can't.
So your body can't do that, At that molecular level.
Bad for your body then?
No, I think they say if you drank a pint of heavy water, you'd be seriously crook.
Wow.
So if you were to be poisoned, that would be an interesting way of poisoning you.
So I had a look at the video on your site, and you've got a team of people. We here at just so the listeners and viewers can see that we are at the Cambridge University, the Emmanuel College, and this is where you're based.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And part of your team's focus is 3 topics. So it's what are the impacts and changes in man-made emissions on the composition of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So it's about the air. And then how does the changing composition of the atmosphere affect climate? And then the reverse.
Yeah.
How does climate affect the atmosphere?
Yeah.
And I saw that video of how you guys flying over the ocean with an airplane.
Yeah.
Do you guys still using that airplane, or is it just a once-off thing? And
No. We try and go out about twice a year. Our big study focuses on the North Atlantic region, and so we base ourselves from the Azores Islands, which are kind of right in the middle of the North Atlantic, and then we're taking that big aircraft, which is basically a flying laboratory. It has all these mass spectrometers and spectroscopy instruments, huge amounts of scientific, high precision, high quality instrumentation that we're then flying around. And so by doing that, we're able to intercept air and measure the composition, so what's in the air with these high quality instruments. And we're really interested in the things which are kind of present at, you'd kind of think unimportant levels, so what becomes important. So most of the air is made up of nitrogen, oxygen, argon, CO2. We're kind of quite interested in CO2, but we're really interested in some of the things which are present at millions or billions of...
so like really small elements
exactly
of things in the air.
Yeah. Because just because they're present in small amounts doesn't mean they're not important. And some of these are great indicators for pollution and for the health of the atmosphere itself. And some of them are kind of scientifically interesting as well. We want to understand naturally how the Earth works.
So there's something that in the air we don't know enough about yet.
Yeah, absolutely. We think we've discovered new molecules by doing these aircraft campaigns. And that's only thanks to new instrumentation that we could kind of put on the aircraft. So it's quite crazy to think there's this whole unknown. If you look around you, we're kind of walking around in a soup of molecules that
we just can't see them, right?
That we can't see, and that there's so many that we don't even know what they are.
And we're breathing them in.
And
you're making me paranoid now.
Well,
it's like, what are we breathing in?
Yeah, and again, I guess we've been breathing them in for a long time. So there are some things which are kind of, we know.
You mean as a human race?
Yeah, which are natural, and then we're breathing in other things which, we're kind of quite new and haven't been on the scene for so long. And that's what my group is really interested in, knowing what we're breathing in, knowing how it affects us as humans, knowing how it affects the climate, and then knowing how that feeds back onto those molecules themselves.
Let's say you find something interesting.
Yeah.
How does that feed back into everyday life or into legislation, or how
Yeah,
does that work?
so most of the time it's about providing the scientific evidence to support policies. So, for example, lots of the work that the group has been doing historically is on the stratospheric ozone hole. So in the upper atmosphere. Is
that what we know as the ozone layer?
Yeah,
hole in the ozone.
That's right. Yeah, so at about 30 kilometers high in the atmosphere is where most of the ozone sits, and the ozone acts like a sunblock. So in the tropics, it's really saving your skin because it's absorbing all of the really harmful ultraviolet radiation from the sun. And in the 80s, people discovered that there's a massive hole in the ozone layer that forms every springtime in the southern hemisphere over Antarctica.
You mean it gets bigger?
It gets small. Well, there's a big hole.
Yeah.
So basically, if you think about the ozone layer being like a blanket,
Yeah.
then there's a huge hole in the blanket over the southern hemisphere, and it creeps up. So it goes from Antarctica all the way to Australia. So it's a huge hole.
And stuff's coming in there like bad sun rays.
So then the UV radiation, really increases. And so one of the first things that people noticed were that there were really large increases in melanoma and skin cancers associated with this hole. So you could basically draw a line and you could say how big is the hole, and that's how many extra people have got skin cancer.
Is that hole getting bigger? Or?
And it's thanks to kind of the scientific evidence, which then supported policy, and the policy was internationally ratified. Every country in the world signed up to this policy.
What's it, CFOs or something like that?
CFCs. Yeah. And basically, every country now no longer uses CFCs. They use replacement gases instead, which do the same job effectively. I mean, these were refrigerants. These were things to make foam in your cushions and things like that. And so it was kind of, it's heralded as a great success for the environment because it was scientists who discovered the problem, and it was engineers who came up with workarounds for the problems, and it was policymakers who put everything together. And the ozone hole is getting smaller, and it is healing itself. So it's a really good thing.
That was a big shift was a big thing for the planet, basically.
Yeah.
Is there something that should be happening now that's similar that we're not doing?
Yeah, well, I think the gorilla in the room is, climate change and CO2, really. So, yeah, I mean, we should be reducing our carbon footprint as rapidly as possibly and looking to low carbon or zero carbon fuels and increasing the levels of sustainability as well. I mean, there are certain natural limits that the planet can only sustain.
And young people seem to be on that path, as in they were leaving. They even went out of school and protested about climate change and such. Yeah. So there seems to be at the younger generation, the biosphere consciousness is
That's
there.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe it's the older generation who are not into it, or do you think it's maybe a bit unfair to?
No, I think that's exactly fair. I think it's probably it's like one of those things when you've got more to lose, you're less willing to change. And when it's like the children are starting out, so they don't have cars and TVs and things like this and houses that they feel threatened that they would lose. I think the reality is though, we're not going to suddenly go back to horses and living in caves. So sustainability and low carbon lifestyles doesn't mean being a Luddite and getting rid of your laptop and,
So you can still be living in the now with your technology, but in a way that's not detrimental to the environment.
And I think we know that there are ways to do that, like solar energy, wind power, tidal power, and I think the big one is just using less. Fundamentally, if we use less power, then that's kind of a huge saving in itself.
And that's a bit of a bugbear for me, and I kind of put it onto my kids, which I probably shouldn't, but I'm like, we're over-consuming food. We don't need to eat so much food, And I think in a way it's true, because in the West food's available everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
And if you think about a few hundred years ago,
it
wasn't available all the time everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think we're overeating in a way.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the. Actually, I was going to talk about volcanic eruptions, because I know your team have also worked on volcanoes.
Yeah.
So they cause quite a lot of CO2 to be emitted into the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. But then I remember reading many years ago, like, we're not doing so much damage. Look at volcanoes; they're doing even more damage. Mm-hmm. But I think that's unfair to say that volcanoes are doing more damage.
Oh,
right?
yeah, definitely. When people talk about the CO2 from volcanoes, that's over sort of geological timescales. So when we go back to kinetics, that's like the really, really slow processes. So when the dinosaurs died out, there was this huge amount of volcanic activity in northern India, which they think that might have helped contribute to the downfall of the dinosaurs. Okay. But you're talking about a huge amount of volcanism that we've never seen in human lifetime. In human lifetime, there have been some big volcanoes, Krakatoa, Pinatubo, kind of more recently in the 80s. And we've been looking at some old volcanoes as well. But generally what they tend to do actually is cool the planet, because they chuck up all of this dust and sulfur dioxide as well, and then that creates aerosols in the upper atmosphere, and then those aerosols basically reflect back the sun's light. And it's a bit, again, you can kind of think of it, one analogy for global warming is that CO2 acts like a blanket, and that it stops the heat from the Earth going back into space, and so it reflects that heat. Now, the way that the volcanoes work is they sort of act maybe a bit more like tinfoil. And so they're like tinfoil in the upper atmosphere, reflecting back the sun's radiation, so it stops hitting the surface. So then the surface cools.
Right. Didn't know that. So that's interesting. So we can't blame volcanoes then?
Definitely not. No.
So outdoor pollution we can all conceive of, because we just spoke about that. We're talking about CO2 and such. But indoor pollution, is there something that we don't know that we should be doing in our homes to improve the air quality in our homes? Even our workplaces?
Well, I think, on that question, there's a lot that we don't know. And the things that we do know is that, you spend most of your time indoors. Recently, we've been working in Beijing and monitoring people, so putting air pollution sensors on people, and then they're free to go about their daily lives. But what we see from that is that at least in Beijing, people spend at least 80% of their time indoors, and that makes sense, right? You sleep for 7 or 8 hours.
A third of
the day. The other third you're in work, which is usually indoors for most people. And then, actually most of the other parts of the day you're eating or doing something else, watching some TV or whatever, reading. You're probably indoors. So 80% sounds like a big number, but actually when you think about it, it probably is quite realistic. On average, that people are spending most of their time indoors. And we don't monitor indoor air. So no government makes measurements of indoor air to tell you,
especially in your home, right?
In your home, yeah. In the workplace, in big, chemical factories, it's a different story. But in your home, I guess it's quite apparent when you think about it. What are the major sources of the pollution that you'd be exposed to? Cooking, cooking really is the main one, and then cleaning. And the key indicator that we have is our nose. If you smell something, that's telling you there's something in the air. So every time you spray some bleach around the house, some of that is staying in the air and you're breathing in some of it. Kind of makes sense. How harmful is that? We don't know.
It hasn't been measured yet.
We don't know, yeah. But I think what you can do, and what I really always suggest to people, if you can afford to get a extraction system over your cooker that extracts the air outside, do that. I mean, that's like the number one best thing you can do. Number two, always try and have a window open when you're cooking to just let fresh air in, and try and, if you can, seal off where you're cooking from the rest of the house. So if you have doors for the kitchen, and it kind of, I mean, to me as well, it makes sense. I don't like the smell of my nice spaghetti bolognese on my towels. No. So I always kind of keep the door open and the window open and let everybody else smell my nice cooking.
There's some, so cooking, I would assume that that's frying, you frying stuff up and that's going into there.
Yeah.
But, the smell of baked bread, for example.
Oh, yeah.
That's beautiful, right?
And I think that's, I think we're fine there with baked bread. Yeah. And you're right, to hit the nail on the head, it's frying, so it's cooking with oil, cooking meats and things like that. That's kind of the major.
That could be harmful for you.
Yeah.
So some practical things is open the window, get an extractor fan.
Yeah.
What about things like whole house, entire house ventilation systems or filters for the entire house? Now, obviously, the rich can afford that.
Yeah.
But is that practical? Should we aspire to that in the future? I don't know.
It's pretty bleak to think that like we should be aspiring to that in the future, because then that's sort of saying that
outside is bad.
Yeah, that like our solution is to bury our head and just suck the pollution away rather than kill the pollution at the source. So stop emitting pollution. But that's, for some people that's their mindset. I don't think that's a sustainable mindset, because to suck the pollution away costs energy, and so you're creating a huge energy resource to kind of deal with that problem.
That's a good point.
Although, if you look in Beijing at the moment, there's a number of manufacturers who are making air purifiers and filters, and they are doing great business in Beijing right now.
On that, I mean, you mentioned something earlier about Beijing.
Yeah.
One of my things is when you go to these Asian countries, you see people wearing anti-pollution masks.
Yeah.
In the airport, because I went through, I think it was Thailand, Bangkok once.
Yeah.
And then it was the first time I saw that. It was many years ago, talking about 10, 15 years ago. Here, you wouldn't see people in Cambridge really walking around with those things. It's probably more of a social thing. You don't really want to be seen with a mask. But then I saw that in the UK, they're making masks for cyclists.
Yeah.
So if you're in London, for example, you're wearing like a air filter mask.
Yeah.
Should we be wearing that now, or is it also just hiding from the fact, like you said, that instead of fixing the air?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and because I'm a cyclist here, and every time I'm sat behind a bus,
you think about it, right?
I'm thinking like, what do I do? Do I close my mouth and hold my nose for the next 10 seconds? Do I try and get around the bus and risk my life? What do I do? And do these 10 seconds matter, that I'm exposed to this? We don't know, right? What we know is that long-term exposure is really bad. I think also what we know is that ill-fitted masks can be worse and are worse than no mask, sorry. So a mask that doesn't quite fit properly, effectively, can end up just basically concentrating all the pollution. So if you imagine like the pollution can
it's coming in.
Yeah, and it's not being able to move around. So you really need something which is designed to perfectly fit around your mouth, or has the ability to perfectly fit around your nose and your mouth. And then you're talking about something which is really expensive and might not be, suitable for everybody. So those kind of masks that you see in Southern Asian and Asian countries, they're also, I mean, there's two things there. One of them is that those are surgical masks usually.
Yeah.
So they do nothing. They do absolutely nothing for air pollution because the pollution can just fly around.
Air's going in.
Yeah, and it is much more culturally. It's kind of a etiquette type of thing. If you have a cold, then you will put on something to stop the spread of disease, and it's much more about the spread of disease. But it's interesting because then people have also got it in their head as well that this will stop the air pollution disease, but it doesn't, unfortunately.
No.
So
if people are wearing those ones that are nicely fitted, good for them.
Yeah.
It's probably good for their health. But like you say, we should be fixing the...
we should be hitting it at the source. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to talk about future habitable planets. I'm not too sure how much thought you've given this.
Yeah.
But I was watching a BBC documentary about, and I think it's Stephen Hawkins, and talking about the future of humanity and possibly going to different planets.
Yeah.
And on the program, they were talking about planets that sit within the Goldilocks belt.
Yeah.
So they're just a certain distance from a star that's hot enough. But the atmosphere, they reckon, might not be conducive for human life. And they were talking about creating atmosphere on the planet. So since you're into air quality and such, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, this is also actually one of the things that people in my team research. So we look at the atmospheric chemistry on exoplanets. And so we try and, what we do is we're modelers. So we try and model what's going on. And one of the key questions we have is knowing, are the conditions in the atmosphere suitable to support life? And then ultimately, what were the initial conditions on our planet that meant that life could thrive?
Okay. So it's figuring out what went well here.
Yeah, if we know what went well here, then we might have the ability to say, okay, if we look on another planet, well, this is what we need. We need a certain amount of hydrogen, a certain amount of water, a certain amount of CO2, certain amount of methane, something like that. And what we're kind of really interested in is molecules that contain nitrogen. And so most of the atmosphere contains nitrogen, but it's locked
within our planet. Most of it's nitrogen.
Most of the air around us is nitrogen. In the planet itself has basically no nitrogen. So the soil, the rocks, everything, all the rocky stuff is kind of absent of nitrogen. So where does this nitrogen come from that's all around us? And that's kind of, there's some really big, interesting questions there. So, and what's the function of that nitrogen? So for our bodies, if we don't have nitrogen, we die. Our proteins are made of amino acids, and amino acids kind of have nitrogen in them as.
And in our bodies, we don't have nitrogen, but we need nitrogen.
So our proteins, our flesh is made up of amino acids, and that contains nitrogen, but it's nitrogen in an organic molecule. We breathe in N2, which is 2 nitrogen atoms joined together, and then we breathe it straight out. So because basically that nitrogen-nitrogen bond, that chemical bond in N2 is so strong, it takes sort of things like lightning bolts to break apart that N2 bond.
So our body can't do that.
So our body can't do that, and instead, what we what do we eat? What do you eat?
Well, vegetables,
meat.
Yep.
And so that's because those have worked out ways to. Basically, it's plants that have worked out ways to split the nitrogen apart and to incorporate nitrogen into them. If there were no plants, there'd be no cattle. If there were no cattle, we wouldn't have that source of protein from cows. And so we have this huge requirement of taking nitrogen from the atmosphere, functionalizing it using plants, and then eating plants to give us the essential nitrogen in our bodies.
So for these future planets.
You need to be able to have nitrogen that can be functionalized into these building blocks of life, these amino acids. And very interestingly, so in the 1970s, I think, these 2 chemists did these experiments. They were called Miller and Uri, I think. And what they did was they wanted to see what was the primordial, so the early atmosphere like. So they got a big glass flask, and they put in some nitrogen, some methane, some ammonia, and they put an electric discharge through. So they just put a big current through to simulate lightning strikes, basically. And they created amino acids. So, and they said, well, this is it. These are the gases that you need for the building blocks for life. But without that big electrical discharge, you couldn't convert them in the first place. And I think whilst you've experienced a lot of lightning, and whilst there is quite a lot of lightning, there isn't enough lightning to kind of be the principal mechanism to convert this unreactive N2 gas into these reactive molecules. So we need life. So it's kind of a paradox. We need life to sustain life. So it kind of comes back to that fundamental question: how did it all start? And we don't know. But going back to your question about these Goldilocks planets, I would think the one thing, if we could engineer, we're talking about real science fiction now, because these exoplanets are light years away, right? They might even be dead by the time we get there, engulfed by the stars that they're orbiting. But if we could take something like ammonia, which is much more functionalized as a nitrogen gas, then that might be able to then kickstart the chemical reactions, which could then produce these amino acids and
So the way I see it is probably we'd need to go and send a convoy of robots there to generate the atmosphere, to get it going over hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So that it could produce this atmosphere before we actually go there.
Yeah.
It's going to take a while. You're thinking about a planet that's massive, right?
Yeah. No, and it probably, we don't really have a good handle on how long it took our atmosphere to form. Millions of years, probably.
If we knew, we'd have a lot better plan to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's an interesting topic, and I really enjoyed those programs that the BBC put out on that, because it is something like the Elon Musks of this world are thinking about, where do we go as a human race? We should explore.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we need to focus on this planet and make sure that it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that it we don't have to leave.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think, and people are looking at Mars again as
And why would they though, Mars? Because it's very dry and red and just sand and.
I think because the temperature is sort of not too bad for life, that you could. Okay, so the atmosphere is kaput.
There's nothing there, right, for us to breathe.
But potentially, if you could bring in some canned gas, and have these bubble dome places, at least from the temperature of the planet would be able to support some forms of life. Whereas, Venus, it's a non-starter, Jupiter, it's a non-starter, so it's probably, other than the moon again would be another, planet that might be, or not a planet, but, like a plan B option. But I think, we really are focusing on science
fiction right now, but it might become reality in the future, you just never know. So, but on that was one of my questions was, do you think that this planet will become too toxic for us to live on? Or is it also something that's not going to happen?
No, I don't think so. And I cycled past a sign this morning, I can't remember, but there's some organisation, the Extinction something, and I think they had...
I think I've heard of them.
They had like some protests in the House of Commons as well, and saying that climate change will lead to the mass extinction of all species on the planet. And no, I don't buy that. I don't think there's scientific evidence to support that. So no, I don't think, at the same time, climate change isn't great, and it's within our means. If you've created a problem, it's your responsibility to try and do something about that. We can do something about that, and morally we should do something about that. But we're not at the stage where it's sort of we're endangering the entire ecosystem of the planet.
On climate change itself specifically, I've heard some scientists, I suppose, that they say that there is a natural warming of the planet, natural cooling cycles over many hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And that we are in a naturally warming cycle right now. But the fact that we're adding man-made stuff to it is making it worse.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And what we see, so here in Cambridge, there's an organisation called the British Antarctic Survey. So they're based in West Cambridge on Madingley Road. So they are the UK's experts in Antarctic science. So, one of the big things that they do is they drill these ice cores in Antarctica. And I think they're 3 kilometres long or something ridiculous like this. And so they've gone down, basically the ice records history, so they can go through 1 million years of ice. And you see that the temperature goes up and down like this naturally. And that's because the planet doesn't just orbit around the sun in a constant circle. It changes with time. And we've kind of known about that for a long time, for decades. And that's what leads to natural variations.
Do we know when that's going to start going down the cooling cycle?
Yeah, but not for tens of thousands of years.
Oh, really?
Right, yeah. And, because we came out of an ice age not that long ago, a couple of thousand years, relatively a couple of thousand.
It was about 12,000 years ago? Or?
Yeah, something like that. So that was the last glacial maximum, and now all of the glaciers have been retreating, and they should retreat because we should be going through a warming phase. But then in another 10,000 years, we'll go to more glaciers, and if the planet still is affected by those natural changes in climate, what we're doing at the moment is not natural, right? We're taking effectively dead dinosaurs, burning them in our cars and pumping the CO2 that was, locked for millions of years in the planet, in the blink of an eye, releasing that.
And that's causing...
Yeah, and another question is though, well, how long can we go on doing that? We can't burn fossil fuels forever because they're finite. So ultimately then, you kind of start to think about, well, okay, if we burn up all the fossil fuels, what would be the impacts there on the planet?
Has someone done calculations like that before?
Yeah, and I think it does. Very much fewer people have done those sorts of calculations, what happens if we burn everything. But, it doesn't look great, because as soon as you start to get rid of all of the ice sheets themselves, then the planet basically starts to warm up much more, because the ice sheets reflect back loads of the sun's radiation back into space. Yeah. Because they're white. So as soon as you remove those ice sheets, it warms up much quicker.
It's a bit of a cycle,
it's a feedback. It's a feedback is what it is. Yeah. And similarly, the opposite happens as well. So as soon as you start to get quite a bit of ice, it then gets a lot colder, and so you have this.
That continues.
Yeah, and we've done this. So one of my PhD students looked at snowball Earth, and so in the geological record, we know that several times in Earth's history, it's completely frozen over. So even in Zimbabwe, there were glaciers.
Even in hot places.
Even in the middle of the tropics, yeah.
And that's something that we could look forward to, probably. Probably going to happen, right?
At some point, yeah.
So, what do you do differently now in your life?
Yeah.
Now that you've been in this arena of life, chemical kinetics, do you have different mindset practices, daily habits that you do?
I think largely I've tried to be a bit more conscious about everything I do. So thinking, I think, and that's the key thing. Do I need this? Do I need a plastic bag? Yes or no? No. Do I need to buy this product which has all this packaging when actually this other one which is got no packaging would satisfy me equally? I think that's it. I think just engaging more with thinking about the consequences of what
your actions are.
Yeah, exactly. I still fly, we have a car, we have a car that me and my wife share, so I don't walk everywhere and cycle everywhere, because I don't think personally, my impact kind of the impact of that is much harder on life than the impact of me not doing that. The reward for me not doing that, if that makes sense. Okay. Yeah. But I'm a big believer though that if we all make small sacrifices, small conscious efforts, that those all add up.
It wouldn't have to be a major life sacrifice. You just have to make those small decisions.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, the plastic thing has been really popular, right? And so I'm pretty sure that we'll see as a result of that, you know, huge improvements.
Yeah, in the oceans especially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If everybody plays their small part in reducing the number of carrier bags they use and things like that, it all does add up. It really does.
Can only help, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we've always been interested, my wife and I, in as a consumer, is sort of knowing something about the climate or the energy costs of the products that you're buying. Again, because if you information is power, right? And so at the moment, what we have are things like how much fat, how much salt, how many calories this product contains. But what if instead it told you about, you know, how much CO2 was used in producing it, how much energy was used in producing it?
That's a good...
Yeah, you'd then be liberated to make more sustainable decisions. You know, I want to buy this product. Actually, I'm not a huge fan of capitalism, but I do like aspects of capitalism where you have freedom of markets and freedom, you know, and that's supported by information, I think, fundamentally.
So electric cars, for example,
yeah,
they've got some kind of impact on the environment to make.
Yeah. But
then afterwards, they're not impacting as much.
They're not impacting as much. They are still having... they're still a source of emissions from things like the brake wear and the tyres. You know, those tyres, you go through tyres, right, on your car.
Yeah, just where they go to, yeah.
Where's it go? You breathe it in. That's where it goes. But, you know, if you think about how many thousands of miles you need to do on your tyres before they've gone completely bald, so they last a long time, right? Yeah. So, but with the electric cars, they're heavier. And so then they go through tyres a bit quicker, is kind of the thing. And
you can't win all the time. You can't.
Well, if there was a golden bullet or a golden pill, you know, we would all be taking it now, right? And I think that is the biggest problem, right? That everybody seeks the quick fix, and it's like dieting, right? If you could develop that drug which made you look like Brad Pitt, every man would.
And it wouldn't take you effort. You just take it,
just took it. Every man would be buying that, right? Because why not? You know. But instead, it's like you have to work hard, and maybe that's actually the kind of the main lesson in life. Like, life is hard, and you do have to work hard, just like the planet has to work hard to keep its act together.
So, with your team and your research, what do you hope to achieve, say, in the next 10 years? Is it those 3 points we spoke about initially? Yeah. Is that still going to be going on for a few years? Or
yeah. So I think what I'd like us to get to is a better understanding of the natural processes that happen in the atmosphere. So that's like with the trees around us. So like I can look out and see some lovely trees over there. So how do they contribute to the composition of the atmosphere that we're breathing? Is that good or bad? And we don't quite know that yet. So I'd like us to kind of resolve questions like that, and how things like, climate change might be affecting trees. I'd really like to get to a state to knowing a bit more about indoor air pollution, and to have a bit more of a sense of how harmful the indoor environment is versus the outdoor environment. I feel like we know the outdoor environment very well, very well compared to the indoor environment. So I'd really like to do that. And I'd also like to push on this exoplanet habitability question a bit more, actually. It's something I'm very interested in. So, and there's groups here that we collaborate with in astrophysics and at the laboratory for molecular biology, and those guys there, they've kind of got some of the most interesting ideas about how life might have started. And so I'd really like to kind of keep exploring that. I think over the next 10 years I'll still be busy, and I'll have 10 other things that I'd quite like to work on, hopefully.
And hopefully some new discoveries that will help mankind.
Yeah, and I think at the moment some of the big things that we're close to really are affecting individual places. So like Delhi, we actually do quite a lot of work in New Delhi. And there's a really interesting mixture of chemicals in the atmosphere there. And
as different to London, for example.
Completely different. Yeah, shockingly different. Like some of the work that I've been associated with is like the first studies to really measure the air pollution there at a molecular level, and we're seeing molecules that we've never seen anywhere else before. So,
and do you know what it's down to?
Well, that's that. Yeah, we're getting closer to knowing what it's down to, and so then when we know what it's down to, we can work out as well whether these are bad or good or benign, and then we can, once we know the sources, we can say to the policymakers, okay, these are the things you need to do to stop this, to improve the air, because sort of Beijing and China has really turned the corner. You know, they've put huge amounts of effort into cleaning up the air, and it's working. It really is working.
It's measurable. That's actually...
You can see it from space, basically.
Really?
You really can.
So from earlier pictures, you might see
haze.
Brown...
Yeah, and the number of clear days has been going up year on year over the last 6 years in Beijing, whereas probably the reverse is true of Delhi, unfortunately. And if you think about over the next couple of decades, the population in India is still projected to increase. It will beat China. India will be more populated than China.
At the moment, China's 1 billion and India's 1 billion.
They're both about 1 billion, yeah. I think maybe 1.1, 1.3.
And China's kind of limited, has policies for their population growth, whereas...
Yeah, I think China's largely reversed a lot of those, and what you're seeing now is the westernization of China, where basically the more affluent you get, the less children you have. So there's a slowdown in your population, which you see Japan, the EU 27 countries, they all have much lower birth rates than places like sub-Saharan African countries, where birth rates might be like 7 or 8. You know, fertility rates of 7 or 8. Yeah. So China's becoming much more westernized, and India is just a bit behind. So over the next few decades, India's population will really continue to grow quite rapidly.
And that does cause pressure on the environment, doesn't it?
Huge amounts, yeah. I mean, already the Ganges River, basically, you can't swim it,
Is it toxic?
Toxic sludge, yeah. But, and as engineers and chemists, we can find solutions for all of this. It requires the evidence first, and that's what interests me and excites me. It's about the fundamental evidence gathering and then presenting that to people. And
so, which is great for you, because you actually get to help practically cities as well.
Yeah.
Did that Ganges River, do you guys get involved with that, because that's water?
No, we don't. Yeah, we stick in the air, but I mean, clearly though, it's a huge problem.
So just the last few questions. I was just interested to know whether you guys do any research into breathing techniques in humans, or is that something that you guys don't do?
Nothing that we do specifically. I mean, I'm aware a bit about in terms of meditation, breathing techniques like that, but nothing that we do to sort of say this is a technique to reduce the amount of pollution you're breathing in, or I think the main thing is not to breathe in when you're very close to sources of pollution. Yeah, and again, you can kind of use your nose as a great indicator. Your nose will really pick up on.
It'll tell you if it's bad or not.
Yeah, it will tell you when you're exposed to things. Generally speaking, yeah.
And then the last question whilst I was researching about what you do, I came across some interesting articles, and one of them was about making skincare products that are natural, because it's got to do with chemical kinetics, apparently. Yeah. So should we be aiming towards more natural products for our bodies, for our skins as well?
That's an interesting one. I think as somebody who, grew up loving nature, then it makes a lot of sense, right? For me to instinctively want to put something like yogurt and honey on my skin rather than something which comes out of a white packet, which is chemical. But I don't think that like there's a general rule which says that that's obviously the right decision to make. And I think certainly what we do know is that man-made chemical products can have huge benefits. I mean, drugs, right? They're keeping us living longer for a start, fighting cancer, things like this. So I don't think we want to completely dismiss man-made chemical products. Sun cream, for example, would you rather have yogurt on your skin or sun cream when you go out for a walk?
Yeah.
Probably I'd rather have sun cream. But then it's all about understanding what some of those longer term impacts might be.
To exposure to certain chemicals,
and we don't know. So, unfortunately, you're kind of in a bit of a guinea pig situation. But then So there's this whole thing about the precautionary principle, like it's better to not do something than to try something.
Yeah.
Which doesn't work, well if that's your way to live. Then you're going to have a very boring, very stunted life, right? And interestingly, like for females who are undergoing pregnancy, like they're kind of some of the biggest victims of the precautionary principle because there are no the recommendations for pregnant women are often don't do this, avoid this, but there's no evidence to say that this is harmful.
This is rather avoid it because we don't know about it.
Exactly. It might hurt the baby. But can you imagine if you do require, so the NHS and, doctors will tell certain pregnant females, well, if you can't live without this drug, whatever it is, antidepressant, then fine, take it. But, we're not going to recommend it, which is a real shame. And it creates this huge information gap for people, so how much caffeine can I have? Can I have a glass of wine? Et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, comes back to that precautionary principle of, just don't do it. And actually, I think that sucks. If you told me for 9 months...
Don't do something.
Don't have a cup of coffee.
Yeah, it's not going to go down well.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Alex, it's been good talking to you today, and I'd like to catch up in a few years to see what new things you've discovered with your team.
Yeah, that sounds great.
We'll be visiting. Maybe we can do it outside in the summer.
Yeah,
in the trees sometime.
Absolutely.
Hopefully on a sunny day.
Yeah, sounds brilliant. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on the LifeShot, and this has been Dr. Alex Archibald from the Emmanuel College in University of Cambridge, and thank you very much.
Thank you.